The low growl wasn't from the dog. That was the first thing that sliced through the morning calm. It was too high-pitched, a guttural tearing sound made by a much smaller throat. Ranger Jake Miller froze, his hand on the cabin door. His husky, Coda, was lying on the wide porch steps, his thick black and white fur a familiar monochrome landscape against the weathered wood. But the sound came from beside him. Coda was unnervingly still, his head resting on his massive paws, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Jake. He wasn't growling. He was waiting. Nestled into the dense fur of Coda's flank were two balls of spotted fluff, their ears tipped with tiny black tufts. They were no bigger than Jake's fists, and they were the source of the noise. Their miniature lips were peeled back to reveal needle-point teeth, their bodies trembling not with cold, but with pure, feral rage. They were Bobcat Kittens, and they were staring down a 200-pound man as if he were their next meal. And Coda, the gentle giant who whimpered at thunderstorms, was letting them. Jake took a slow step forward. The hissing intensified. One of the kittens, slightly bolder with darker spots, swiped a paw armed with impossibly tiny, sharp claws. Coda didn't even flinch. Instead, he let out a low, soft woof, a sound Jake knew well. It was his reassurance sound, the one he used when Jake was sick or a storm was brewing. He then turned his head, nudging the angriest kitten with his broad nose, a gesture of immense gentleness. The kitten, momentarily silenced, tumbled back into his fur. Jake stopped, his heart pounding a strange rhythm of alarm and disbelief. As a ranger in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, he knew the rules. Rule number 1, wild is wild. You don't interfere. You call it in, you let the professionals handle it. You maintain the barrier between their world and yours. His hand twitched, instinctively wanting to reach for the radio on his belt, but his eyes were locked on Coda. The husky looked back at him, a clear, intelligent plea in those piercing blue eyes. They are with me. They are safe. Slowly, cautiously, Jake lowered himself to a crouch a few feet away. The smell of pine and damp earth was mixed with something else, something musky and wild. He scanned the area around the cabin. No sign of a mother, no tracks, no drag marks. He'd been on patrol all morning. He would have seen or heard something. A car on the winding mountain road? A fight with a coyote? A fall? The possibilities were grim and endless. These kittens were alone. And they had, by some miracle of animal instinct, found the one creature in this vast wilderness that wouldn't eat them. They had found a mother. A 100-pound husky with a ridiculously soft heart. Coda, what have you gotten yourself into? Jake whispered. The dog responded by licking the top of the second kitten's head, the one with a slightly more reddish tint to its coat. The kitten squirmed but didn't resist, its tiny engine of a hiss sputtering out. The ranger's rule book was screaming at him, a cacophony of regulations and protocols. But watching his dog, his steadfast companion of 5 years, curl his body around two of the forest's fiercest predators, a different instinct took over. The instinct to protect this bizarre, impossible family. That night was the longest of Jake's life. He brought out a cardboard box with old towels, a perfect, regulation-approved nest. Coda sniffed it once, then led his 2 charges to his own plush dog bed in the corner of the living room, circling them like a furry wall. Jake sat in his armchair, the glow of the fireplace casting long shadows, listening. He listened to the frantic, high-pitched mews of hunger. He watched Coda lick them clean with a patience Jake had never seen. He tried to help, warming some special kitten formula milk he kept for emergencies. The bobcats wanted none of it. They spat and clawed at the rubber nipple, their wildness rejecting the artificial offering. Defeated, Jake sat back down. A few minutes later, Coda nudged the bowl of milk Jake had left on the floor. He lapped a little, then looked at the kittens, nudging them forward. He dabbed his nose in the milk and then licked the bolder kitten's mouth. The kitten, surprised, licked its own lips, a flicker of understanding. After a few more prods from Coda's snout, both kittens were tentatively lapping milk from the bowl, their tiny, rough tongues making a soft pattering sound. Jake didn't move a muscle, witnessing a lesson no human could ever teach. He decided to name them. The bold, dark one would be Flint. The quieter, reddish one would be Ember. The days bled into weeks. The cabin, once a bastion of quiet solitude for a man and his dog, became a chaotic playground. Flint and Ember grew at an alarming rate. Their spots became more defined, their tufted ears more prominent. They graduated from the milk bowl to morsels of meat Jake prepared, which Coda would gently offer them. They learned to play. But their play was different. They didn't chase balls. They stalked them. They didn't pounce with goofy abandon like puppies. They flattened themselves to the floor, their hindquarters wiggling, their eyes fixed with lethal intensity before launching themselves at Coda's twitching tail or Jake's unsuspecting boots. Coda took it all in stride. He was their climbing frame, their sparring partner, their warm bed. He would pin them gently with a massive paw when their play got too rough, and they would submit instantly, before wriggling free to start their ambush all over again. Jake documented it all in his personal journal, not the official ranger log. He knew this was a secret, a fragile bubble that could be popped by a single wrong visitor. The bubble popped on a Tuesday. It was a bright, clear morning. Jake was on the porch, cleaning a rifle, the familiar scent of gun oil in the air. Coda was snoozing in a patch of sun. Flint and Ember were a whirlwind of mock combat in the dusty yard, rolling and chasing each other in silent, fluid motion. They were nearly half Coda's size now, sleek muscles moving under their spotted coats. They were no longer kittens. They were young predators. The sound of a truck engine made Jake look up. It was the familiar green pickup of the Forest Service. Dave, another ranger from the downstream station, was coming for his weekly supply drop. Jake's stomach turned to ice. He whistled sharply. Coda's head shot up. The bobcats froze, their instincts screaming at the unfamiliar sound of the vehicle. "Inside, go!" Jake hissed. But it was too late. Dave's truck rolled to a stop, and he hopped out, a friendly grin on his face. "Hey, Jake, got that new chainsaw blade for you?" His voice trailed off. His grin vanished, replaced by a mask of pure disbelief. His eyes were wide, locked on the two juvenile bobcats who were now standing stock still, their heads low, watching him with cold, yellow eyes. Coda stood protectively in front of them, a low rumble starting in his chest. Dave's gaze flickered from the bobcats to the growling husky, and then to Jake. His hand moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the black radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dave, wait." Jake's voice was a dry rasp. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them, the crunch of gravel under Dave's boots the only sound. Coda's low rumble vibrated through the porch boards, a constant, threatening hum. Flint and Ember were plastered to the Husky's sides, their earlier ferocity replaced by the rigid stillness of prey. Dave's fingers, frozen on the radio's clip, slowly uncurled. His gaze, wide with a mix of fear and utter bewilderment, shifted from the bobcats to Jake, then back again. "What in God's name is this, Jake?" His voice was low, tight with disbelief. "Are you insane? Those are bobcats." I know what they are, Jake said, forcing himself to stand up slowly, keeping his hands open and away from his body. Their mother. I think she's gone. They showed up here a few weeks ago. Coda. He just kind of adopted them. The explanation sounded flimsy and absurd, even to his own ears. A ranger, a steward of the wild, domesticating two predators. It was a career-ending, fireable offense. Dave took a step back, his eyes darting towards the woods, as if expecting a furious mother bobcat to burst from the tree line. Adopted them? Jake, they're not kittens you find in a barn. They will grow up. They will kill things. What if they turn on you or Coda? He gestured with his chin towards the husky. He's a good dog, but he's still a dog. This is a time bomb. Coda, as if understanding, nudged Flint with his nose, a quiet act of reassurance. The bobcat, in turn, leaned into the dog's thick fur. The gesture was not lost on Dave. He scrubbed a hand over his face, his expression torn between professional duty and personal loyalty. He and Jake had come up through the service together, had pulled each other out of more than one tight spot. Look, Dave said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming conspiratorial. I didn't see this, officially, but you've got to fix it, and fast. He took a step closer, his eyes hard. You can't keep them. You know the rules. It's dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for you. They need to be with a proper wildlife rehabilitator, a facility that knows how to prepare them for re-release without human contact. This, he gestured at the surreal scene on the porch. This taints them. They'll associate people with food and safety. That gets them killed. Jake's heart sank. He knew Dave was right. Every word was a textbook truth he himself had preached to countless well-meaning tourists. I have a week, Dave continued, his tone final. I'm due back at the main office for a briefing next Tuesday. By then, they need to be gone. You take them to the rehab center in Medford yourself. Tell them you found them orphaned. Leave your name out of it. Leave Coda out of it. If they are still here when I get back, Jake, I have to make the call. I won't have a choice. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked back to his truck, grabbed the chainsaw blade, and set it on the ground. The friendly purpose of his visit was now a bitter memory. He climbed back into his pickup, gave Jake one last pleading look, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy, suffocating silence. The ultimatum hung in the air long after the sound of the engine faded. A week, 7 days to dismantle a family. Jake sank onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. Coda padded over and rested his heavy head on Jake's knee, whining softly. Flint and Ember, emboldened by the truck's departure, began a stalking game around the porch railings. Their movements a beautiful, deadly dance. How could he take them to a cage? He pictured their wild spirits confined by chain link, their bond with Coda severed forever. They would be terrified and alone. The thought was a physical pain in his chest. But the alternative, Dave's call, was worse. They'd be tranquilized, handled by strangers, and he'd likely lose the job and the home that was his entire life. There had to be another way. A transition, not a sudden, traumatic separation. He had to teach them to be wild again, to choose the forest over his cabin. He had to make them leave on their own terms. All right, he said, scratching Coda behind the ears. We're going to try something, a field trip. The next afternoon, he packed a small bag with water and some jerky for himself. He leashed Coda, a formality the dog barely tolerated. Flint and Ember, seeing Coda prepare to leave, milled around his feet, making small, questioning chirps. You're coming too, Jake said. He led them away from the cabin, not on the familiar access road, but directly into the dense, untamed woods. The air grew cooler under the canopy of ancient Douglas firs. The bobcats were in their element. They darted ahead, their spotted coats providing near-perfect camouflage against the dappled sunlight on the forest floor. They scaled the moss-covered trunks of fallen trees with an agility that left Jake breathless. Coda trotted along happily, the pack leader on an expedition. Jake's plan was to get them to hunt. He spotted the fresh tracks of a snowshoe hare and pointed. "Go on, Coda. Show 'em." The husky, ever eager to please, put his nose to the ground, but his tracking was half-hearted. He was more interested in sniffing a peculiar fungus on a log. Flint and Ember ignored the tracks completely, instead engaging in a fierce wrestling match in a patch of ferns. A wave of frustration washed over Jake. They weren't learning. They were just playing in a bigger backyard. He pushed them deeper, further than he usually ventured on a casual hike. The terrain grew steeper, the forest quieter. The cheerful chatter of squirrels and jays had ceased. An eerie stillness settled over the woods. Coda sensed it first. He stopped dead in the middle of the trail, his body rigid, the fur on his spine bristling. A low growl, deeper and more menacing than any sound Jake had ever heard him make, rumbled in his chest. Flint and Ember instantly flattened themselves to the ground behind him, their playful demeanor gone, replaced by primal instinct. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, his hand going to the large canister of bear spray on his hip. He scanned the dense undergrowth, his eyes straining to see past the deep shadows. Nothing. But the silence was a living thing, heavy and full of threat. Then he saw it. High on a rocky outcrop that overlooked the narrow trail, a flicker of movement. A long, tawny body uncoiled from its resting place. It was a cougar. A massive male, evident by its size and the scarred bridge of its nose. Its yellow eyes, cold and merciless, were not looking at Jake. They were fixed on Flint and Ember, two smaller, rival predators in his territory. Coda took a step forward, deliberately placing his body between the mountain lion and his charges. He didn't bark. He unleashed a full-throated, guttural snarl that was pure wolf, a declaration of war. The cougar was unimpressed. It opened its mouth and let out a terrifying, high-pitched scream that echoed through the silent forest, a sound designed to paralyze prey with fear. Before Jake could even unholster the bear spray, the cougar gathered its powerful hind legs. With an explosive leap, it launched itself from the rock, a silent, fluid projectile of muscle and claw, aimed directly at the defiant husky who refused to back down. Time shattered. The tawny blur of the cougar filled the world. There was no clean takedown, no silent kill. Coda, driven by a loyalty more powerful than fear, didn't cower. He met the charge head-on. The impact was a sickening thud of bodies colliding, 100 pounds of husky against 200 pounds of apex predator. They went down in a brutal, rolling heap of fur and fury. The cougar's jaws, designed to crush vertebrae, snapped shut, missing Coda's neck by a fraction of an inch as the dog twisted violently. Instead, its long canines sank deep into the thick muscle and scruff of Coda's shoulder. A pained, strangled yelp was torn from the husky's throat. He was hopelessly outmatched in weight and power, but he fought with the desperate strength of a protector. His own teeth found purchase on the cougar's leg, and he held on, thrashing his head, buying seconds he didn't have. It was in that maelstrom of violence that the impossible happened. Flint and Ember, who should have fled, who should have been paralyzed with terror, did the opposite. A switch flipped in their wild brains. The pack was under attack. With twin squeals of rage that were terrifying in their miniature intensity, they became two spotted streaks of motion. Ember launched herself onto the cougar's broad back, a frantic ball of claws and teeth, digging into the thick hide, more of a painful irritant than a real threat. Flint, the bolder one, went for the face. He leaped and swiped, his tiny, razor-sharp claws aiming for the cougar's eyes. The big cat roared in frustrated fury, shaking its massive head to dislodge the stinging pests. For one critical second, its focus shifted from the killing bite on Coda's shoulder. That was the only opening Jake would get. The canister of bear spray felt impossibly clumsy in his trembling hands. He ripped the safety clip off and lunged forward, closing the distance to a suicidally close range. "Hey!" he screamed, his voice cracking, a raw, primal sound. As the cougar's head turned towards the new noise, Jake depressed the button. A thick, conical cloud of blazing orange pepper solution erupted from the canister, engulfing the cougar's entire head. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The cougar's enraged roar became a wet, choking gag. It released Coda, staggering backward, pawing frantically at its burning eyes and nose. It coughed and retched, blinded and suffocating, the powerful capsaicin searing its sensitive mucous membranes. With a final, agonized snort, it turned and bolted, crashing through the undergrowth and vanishing into the deep woods. A profound, ringing silence fell over the trail, broken only by the sound of labored, ragged breathing. Coda lay on the ground, a crumpled heap of black and white fur. A river of dark blood was already soaking into the forest floor from a terrifying, gaping wound on his shoulder. His left foreleg was twisted at a horribly wrong angle. Jake's blood ran cold. He knelt, his hands hovering over his friend, not knowing where to touch first. "Coda!" "Oh, God, boy." The husky whined, a weak, pathetic sound, and tried to lift his head. Jake then noticed Flint. The little bobcat was standing a few feet away, favoring his front right paw, a deep but not life-threatening gash bleeding freely onto the leaves. Ember was unhurt, frantically nudging Coda's face with her own, letting out a series of low, mournful chirps. The journey back to the cabin was a nightmare. Coda couldn't put any weight on his leg. The cabin was over 2 miles away. Adrenaline surged through Jake. He was a ranger. He was trained for this. He carefully maneuvered his arms under his dog, hoisting the 100-pound dead weight into a fireman's carry. The pain in his own back was immediate, but he ignored it. He began the slow, agonizing trek back, each step a monumental effort. The whole way, the 2 bobcats flanked him. Flint limped doggedly beside him, his small body tense, his eyes scanning the woods. Ember darted back and forth along the path, a tiny, silent scout for their broken procession. They weren't pets. They weren't projects. They were a pack, wounded but unbroken. Back in the cabin, he gently laid Coda on a pile of old blankets on the floor. The scent of blood filled the small space. Jake's hands, clumsy with shock, became steady with purpose. He grabbed his advanced field trauma kit. First, the leg, a clean break to the ulna. He worked quickly, talking to Coda in a low, soothing monotone. "Easy, boy. I got you. It's okay. I got you." He set the bone, the quiet snap making him flinch more than the dog, who only let out a long, shuddering whimper. He fashioned a sturdy splint from sticks and medical wrap, immobilizing the limb. Then, the gash. It was deep, torn open by the cougar's claws. It needed stitches. Disinfecting the wound, he began the slow, meticulous work of suturing, his needle weaving a dark thread to close the torn flesh. All the while, Ember curled up by Coda's head, her tiny tongue methodically licking the fur around his ear. A constant, comforting presence. Flint, after allowing Jake to quickly clean and bandage his own leg, posted himself by the cabin door. He didn't rest. He sat upright, his back to the room, his yellow eyes fixed on the darkening forest outside. A small, wounded soldier standing guard. Night fell like a shroud. Jake finished his work, exhausted and splattered with his dog's blood. He gave Coda a dose of canine painkiller and an antibiotic from his kit. But a deep chill was already setting into the dog's body. He was shivering, his breathing shallow. A fever was taking hold. Jake collapsed into his armchair, watching the rhythmic, weak rise and fall of Coda's chest. The clock was ticking. Dave's deadline was no longer a problem for next week. It was an impossible barrier. He couldn't move Coda. He couldn't leave him. And he couldn't abandon the two small predators who had risked their lives for his dog. He was trapped, utterly and completely. He closed his eyes, the image of the cougar's leap burning behind his eyelids. That's when he heard it, cutting through the heavy silence of the mountain night. It was a low, distant rumble at first, growing steadily louder. The unmistakable sound of tires on gravel coming up his driveway. A prickle of cold fear ran down his spine. It wasn't Tuesday. It was far too late for a casual visitor. The headlights swept across his windows, plunging the room into a brief, stark reality before darkness returned. The engine cut out, and a truck door slammed shut. The knock on the door was not a friendly rap. It was a hard, authoritative thump that vibrated through the log walls. Flint, positioned at the door, didn't bolt. His small, limping body tensed, and a hiss escaped his teeth, a miniature serpent's warning. Jake's mind raced. Dave wouldn't come back. Not tonight. Not like this. He pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest, and moved towards the door. Every instinct told him to hide the bobcats, to cover Coda, to pretend nothing was wrong. But the smell of blood and antiseptic was overwhelming. There was no hiding this. He took a deep breath, turned the handle, and opened the door. Standing on his porch, silhouetted against the stark moonlight, was Chief Ranger Marcus Thorne, a man carved from the same ancient wood as the forests he managed. He was in his late 50s, granite-faced, with eyes that had seen everything the mountains could throw at a man and were rarely impressed. He wasn't smiling. "Saw your lights," Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried the weight of command. His eyes weren't on Jake. They were already scanning the interior of the cabin, past Jake's shoulder. "Heard you missed your last 2 radio check-ins. Figured I'd take a ride up." His gaze landed on the scene on the floor and froze. He didn't speak. He simply stepped inside, his boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the wooden floor. The air crackled with a tension thicker than smoke. Thorne's eyes, sharp and analytical, took it all in. The bloody blankets, the discarded suture kit, Coda's bandaged and splinted body, the whimpering ember curled by his head. And finally, his gaze settled on Flint, who was still holding his ground by the door, a low growl emanating from his chest, his injured paw held slightly off the floor. "Explain this, Miller," Thorne said, his voice dangerously quiet. It was the tone he used right before a man lost his job. "And it better be the best damn story I've ever heard." Jake's throat was dry. The well-rehearsed lies he'd prepared for Dave evaporated. Facing Thorne, only the raw, unvarnished truth seemed possible. "Cougar," Jake said, his voice hoarse. "This afternoon, on the Ridge Trail, I went for them." He nodded towards the bobcats. "Coda got in the way." Thorne knelt, his joints cracking in the quiet room. He didn't look at Jake. He looked at the work, his calloused fingers gently, expertly, probed the edges of the bandage on Coda's shoulder. He felt the heat radiating from the wound. He ran a hand over the splint, testing its firmness. He was a ranger to his core. He knew field medicine. "Clean stitches," he noted, his voice flat. "Bones set right." He then looked at Coda's pale gums, felt the thready, rapid pulse in his neck. His expression was grim. "But he's going into shock, and this wound is infected already. My guess is you punctured the joint capsule. Field dressing isn't going to stop this. He needs a vet. He needs heavy-duty IV antibiotics, or you're going to lose him by morning." Every word was a hammer blow. Jake knew it. He felt the heat from Coda's body, saw the tremor that wouldn't stop. "I couldn't move him," Jake pleaded, his voice breaking. "I carried him back. I did everything I could." Thorne finally stood up and looked Jake square in the eye. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was something far worse, deeply, profoundly disappointed. "You brought 2 wild predators into a ranger-issued cabin. You domesticated them. You broke every rule in the book, Jake. You know the protocol. An incident like this, a ranger injured, an animal attack. It's a mountain of paperwork, an investigation. And they would find this." He swept a hand around the room at the impossible family Jake had created. "You wouldn't just lose your job. You'd be blacklisted from the service for life. I'd be forced to testify against you." A desperate hope flickered in Jake. "The cougar," he said, latching onto the detail. "They fought it. They helped him. Flint, Ember, they saved his life. They attacked the cougar. That's how Flint got hurt. They're a pack, Marcus. They protected him." Thorne looked from the defiant little bobcat to the massive, wounded husky. He saw the truth in it. He saw the impossible bond. For a moment, the hard lines on his face softened. He had lived in these mountains his whole life. He knew they operated on their own rules. "Maybe so," he conceded, the words heavy. "But the world down the mountain doesn't care about that. All they see is a ranger who went rogue, a liability." He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the rasp of Coda's breathing and the low hum of the refrigerator. "But he's a good dog?" Thorne said, his voice softer now. "He doesn't deserve to die because his master's a damn fool." He pulled out his satellite phone, its green light a beacon of hope in the dark room. "I know a vet, an old friend, over in Ashland. He's good and he knows how to be quiet. He owes me a favor. I can get him to meet us at a private airstrip in an hour. We can have Coda on an operating table before midnight." Jake's heart leaped. Hope, pure and overwhelming, flooded him. "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you. I'll get him ready." He started to move towards Coda. "I haven't made the call yet," Thorne said, stopping him cold. His finger hovered over the phone's keypad. His face was stone again. "There are conditions, Jake. This whole thing gets buried, deep. There will be no official report of a cougar attack. The story is you were on patrol. Coda fell, a freak accident, a broken leg and a bad gash from a rock. Plausible." Jake nodded eagerly, willing to agree to anything. "Yes, of course. Anything." Thorne's eyes drifted to Flint and Ember, who were now watching him with unnerving intelligence. His voice dropped, losing all trace of warmth. "And them," he said. "They don't exist. They were never here. A story like this gets out. Reporters, animal rights groups, bureaucrats. It would be a circus. It would destroy the credibility of this station. It would destroy me. I can't have loose ends." A knot of pure dread formed in Jake's stomach. What do you mean? Thorn met his gaze, his eyes devoid of pity. I mean, I look the other way while you load your dog into my truck. And when we're gone, there's a cabin fire, a tragic accident, faulty wiring, nothing left but ash, no evidence, no bobcats, no career-ending mistakes. Jake stared at him, horrified. The cabin? The fire. He understood the cold, brutal logic. But Flint and Ember were inside. No, Jake whispered, shaking his head. No, Marcus. I can't do that. Thorn's face hardened. You don't have another choice. Coda is dying. The fever is getting worse. We are out of time. It's the cabin, Jake. Or the cats. He paused, letting the horrific choice sink in. Decide. Now. The word no formed on Jake's lips, but it died there. Saying no meant Thorn would walk away. He would leave Jake alone on his mountain with his dying dog, and the brutal calculus of the wild would run its course. Coda would be gone by sunrise. The weight of that reality was crushing, absolute. Thorn's gaze was unyielding, a force of nature in itself. He wasn't a monster. He was a pragmatist offering a scorched earth solution to an impossible problem. Jake's eyes darted from Thorn's flinty face to Coda's trembling form, then to Flint, the small, wounded sentinel still guarding the door. They had saved Coda. A fire would be their reward. The injustice of it was a bitter poison. There's another way, Jake said, his voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence. A better way. Thorn's expression didn't change. I'm listening, but the clock is ticking. You want them gone. You want them to disappear with no record. Jake began, thinking desperately, weaving a plan from threads of hope and adrenaline. A fire is messy. Arson investigators are smart. They find things. It's a risk. Thorn raised a skeptical eyebrow. What's your clean solution, Miller? Give me time, Jake pleaded, finding his voice. Let me get Coda to the vet. Let me save him, and I will make them disappear. I swear it on my badge. How? Thorn's question was a sharp, clinical blade. The way it should have happened in the first place, Jake said, the plan solidifying in his mind. I'll rewild them. I'll take them far from here, deep into the national forest, into territory where they can thrive. I'll spend every day I have to, teaching them to hunt, to be independent, to fear humans. I'll break the bond. When they are gone, they will be gone for good. They'll just be 2 more bobcats in a forest of thousands. No fire, no evidence, no questions asked. Just a ranger and his dog who had a little accident. Thorn was silent for a long time, his eyes boring into Jake, weighing the man, the plan, the risks. He looked at the 2 bobcats, their wildness barely contained within the 4 walls of the cabin. It was an insane proposal, a ranger trying to play Mother Nature. It was doomed to fail. But a fire was a lie he'd have to live with forever. This was a fool's errand, but it had a strange, wild honor to it. You have until the first snow, Thorn said, his voice dropping to a low, final tone. The first heavy snow that closes the high passes. That's your deadline. If I hear so much as a whisper about a man raising bobcats after that, I will personally come up here and end your career. Am I understood? Understood, Jake breathed. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. Crystal clear. Good, Thorn said, finally tapping the screen of his sat phone. Let's go save your dog. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Thorn's truck was powerful, its suspension built for rough terrain. They carefully fashioned a stretcher from a tarp and 2 sturdy branches, moving Coda with agonizing slowness. Ember refused to leave his side, letting out panicked chirps, until Jake had to physically pick her up and place her back inside the cabin with a pained look. "Guard him," he whispered to Flint, who seemed to understand, limping back to his post by the door. The drive down the mountain was a silent, bone-jarring ordeal. Jake sat in the passenger seat, his hand resting on Coda's flank, feeling the weak, feverish tremors. He stared out at the dark, flying shapes of the trees, his mind a whirlwind. He had bought time, but he had paid for it with a promise that felt as heavy as the mountain itself. The vet, a man named Elias Vance, with tired eyes and hands as steady as a surgeon's, was waiting for them at a small private airfield. The hangar was lit by a single bare bulb, smelling of oil and old leather. There were no questions asked. Vance took one look at Coda, at the crude but effective splint in the angry, swollen wound, and got to work on a stainless steel table. Marcus wasn't kidding, he muttered, drawing blood for tests. "You're lucky. Another few hours and the sepsis would have been irreversible." Thorne stood in the corner, a silent statue, while Jake watched every move, every injection, every sterile instrument. Vance worked for nearly 2 hours, cleaning and debriding the wound, which was far deeper than Jake had realized. The cougar's claw having torn ligaments near the shoulder joint, he put Coda on a powerful IV drip of antibiotics and fluids. "The leg will heal," Vance said finally, wiping his hands. "The splint was good work, but this infection is the real fight. He needs to stay on this drip for at least 48 hours. I'll keep him here in the hangar. It's quiet." Jake felt a profound, gut-wrenching emptiness at the thought of leaving his dog. "He'll be okay?" "He's strong," Vance said with a reassuring nod. "And he's in a hell of a lot better shape than he was an hour ago. Now go. The less you're here, the better for everyone." The drive back up the mountain was even quieter. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a hollow ache of exhaustion and dread. The sky was beginning to pale in the east when Thorne's truck rumbled to a stop in front of the cabin. "Remember the terms, Miller," Thorne said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "First snow." Jake nodded, unable to speak. He got out of the truck and watched as Thorne turned the vehicle around and drove away, leaving him alone once more. He pushed open the cabin door. The scent of blood was still there, but fainter. Flint and Ember were huddled together on Coda's empty bed, their bodies a small island of spotted fur in a sea of empty blanket. They both looked up as he entered, their yellow eyes wide and questioning. They could smell that Coda was not with him. Ember let out a soft, mournful chirp. Jake's heart broke all over again. He had saved Coda, but he had just promised to destroy the only other family he had. He slumped into his armchair, the weight of his vow settling upon him. The sun rose, casting long golden fingers of light into the room. He must have dozed off, because a soft sound near his feet startled him awake. He looked down. Flint was there, looking up at him. The Bobcat then nudged something on the floor towards Jake's boot with his nose. It was a gift. Laid neatly on the floorboards was a still warm field mouse, its neck broken cleanly. It was a perfect, efficient kill. An offering. Flint looked from the mouse to Jake, a clear, expectant look in his wild eyes, waiting for approval. Jake stared at the small, dead creature, and a chilling realization washed over him. He hadn't been teaching them to be pets. All this time, under Coda's gentle guidance and his own flawed protection, they had been teaching him what they were. And now, the real lesson was about to begin, was about to